people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Tony Yoka versus Martin Bakole. Let's talk about the fight. You know, I didn't give this fight much attention. I didn't. Though on the face of it, I think that most people were expecting Tony Yoka to make it through this. I think most people expected that Tony Yoka, given his size and his amateur pedigree, the fact he had a very strong corner in Virgil Hunter, I think that on the face of it, at first glance, most people were expecting Tony to, at minimum, out-precision Martin Bakole.
Martin Bakole undressed him.
Took away Tony's finer qualities, his speed, his athleticism, the fact that Tony Yoka is very statuesque for a heavyweight, but he moves like a smaller man with the swiftness of a smaller man.
None of that shit mattered to Martin Bakole.
Who, from where I was sitting, asserted his dominance in the opening round, the first round, where...
Yeah, Tony Yoka got off to a terrible start with this guy.
It was a counter left hook from Martin Bakole that heralded a very long, rough night for Tony Yoka in his own home turf, on his own home soil.
Tony let off a couple of shots.
That right hand of his wasn't there to protect that side of his face as Martin Bakole fired a counter left hook that I think took Tony's legs away early on. He was clearly hurt by the shot. Eventually, he hit the deck.
You talk about getting off to a bad start.
If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find Tony Yoka versus Martin Bakole right in there, because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Martin Bakole asserted his dominance early, that he may not come from the same decorated amateur background as Tony Yoka, and perhaps doesn't have all the same tools as Tony, but what he did have was a lot of durability and a whole lot of power.
Yeah.
Cinder blocks in those gloves.
Yeah.
Clubbing right hands.
Yeah.
Quick left hooks.
He hurt Tony Yoka early, and Tony found out early he can't afford to trade with this guy.
And if I'm being honest, in that initial first round, Tony Yoka, he needed some time to get his legs back under him because he looked unsteady afterwards. Even when he was blocking shots that are landing on the arms, landing on the gloves. I think that Tony's equilibrium...
After that first round, it took him a while to get his legs back.
And even when he did, he couldn't discourage Martin Bakole, couldn't back him off, couldn't put a dent in that guy, trying to box him around him, box him from the outside, eating jabs that were snapping his head back.
Martin Bakole busted his nose all
And
up.
this was all in the first half. This was all in the first few rounds of the match. You talk about getting off to a bad start, and you'll find Tony Yoka's name in the dictionary. I mean, that's what you'll see.
I think we now know why Martin Bakole fought so hard to get this fight rescheduled.
You have to remember, this fight was supposed to have taken place some months ago, but due to COVID restrictions, the fight got delayed. The fight got postponed. At which point, Tony Yoka tried to see about participating in an IBF final eliminator with his old amateur buddy, Filip Hrgovic. He wanted to...
Martin Bakole made sure he didn't leave the dance.
He made sure to squeeze the IBF to ensure that Tony Yoka would, in fact, honor their previous engagement, even if it had been postponed. So here we are. Yesterday, Martin Bakole...
The IBF told Tony weeks ago he can't participate in that eliminator with Hrgovic if he already has a prior engagement.
Martin Bakole wanted to ensure that he got his hands on Tony Yoka, and yesterday he did. When he thoroughly outfought him, outclassed him. Tony Yoka looked out of his depth, out of sorts for most of that fight. If I'm being honest, I found it hard to give Tony Yoka
I did.
more than 2 rounds, if that.
And that's factoring in that he's the house fighter.
That's factoring in that Tony Yoka, unlike Martin Bakole, Martin Bakole's the away fighter. Tony's got home field advantage. But even with home field advantage, I found it hard to give Tony 2 solid rounds, 2 decisive rounds in this fight. More than that, anyway.
He looked vulnerable. He looked fragile from round 1 to round 10.
As the fight progressed, after the half, Tony tried to rally back. But, whenever Tony tried to get something going, he was reminded by Martin Bakole that Martin's the heavy-handed puncher in this fight. Martin's the durable guy. Whatever shots Tony landed had almost no effect
on Martin Bakole. Had Martin Bakole winning 8 out of 10 rounds.
Having scored 2 knockdowns within the fight. How one judge had it 94-94 is beyond me. This wasn't a close fight. It wasn't close at all, not even with home cooking.
I mean, there's home cooking, and then there's 94-94 on one judge's scorecard.
94-94 in a fight where Tony Yoka arguably lost every single round, and he was knocked down 2 times in the first half and the latter half of the fight. I mean, at that point, that's not home cooking, that's Thanksgiving.
Fit with all the trimmings.
But you know what the rule of thumb is?
One judge.
You got a marquee fighter like Tony Yoka's a marquee fighter over there in Gay Paris. There's always at least one judge in the pocket. And I think that's what we saw with that 94-94 scorecard, because there's no fucking way it can be reconciled. Even when it comes to home cooking, there is a threshold. The round has to at least be close enough that you could have swung it to either man, at which point you swing it to the hometown fighter.
But the round itself has to be close enough that you can do that and explain it.
But in the round, it was hard to separate both boys, so you gave the hometown fighter consideration. You can do that, but if you do that too much, if that happens long enough throughout the course of the fight, it's clear that what you're looking at is home cooking.
We saw yesterday in that 94-94 scorecard.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's a step removed from home cooking. That's plain old Thanksgiving with all the trimmings.
Mac and cheese.
Tried desperately to give Tony Yoka this fight, but Martin Bakole was just too dominant, too decisive for the judges to steal it from him.
Yeah, there really wasn't much to it. Tony Yoka got off to a bad start. We got hit with a hard shot.
It took him some rounds to recover, to try and get his legs back, and while he's doing that, he's getting outfought by the much stronger and more durable Martin Bakole, who, from where I was sitting, was having it all his way. I mean, this wasn't a close fight by any stretch of the imagination. Even within the threshold of home cooking, there's no way you could have cooked this.
There's no way you could give Tony Yoka this fight.
It can't be reconciled. This is a career best win for Martin Bakole, I think, and I wouldn't mind seeing Martin come back sometime later on this year against, I don't know, Kubrat Pulev, who was in action last night here stateside on the West Coast as part of a Triller card. He battered Jerry Forrest.
Jerry Forrest, who gave Zile Zhang a run for his money.
Same Jerry Forrest who made Michael Hunter look very ordinary in their rematch. Last night, Jerry was in action against Bulgaria's own former Olympian Kubrat Pulev, and Kubrat Pulev decisioned it.
Pulev versus Bakole makes a little bit of sense.
Now, as far as Tony and where he goes from here, obviously he's got to go back to the drawing board, though psychologically, taking a demoralizing beating like that for 10 rounds, it would have been better if he would have got sparked out in the first than being outclassed like that throughout the entirety of the fight for 10 rounds. It is those sustained beatings that have a long-lasting effect on a fighter's career, as opposed to a lone knockout.
It's hard to pinpoint what it is he needs to change.
And what it is, he needs to tweak, because he looked very fragile out there. And, in the heavyweight division, you really are always one punch away from being knocked out. But there has to be a threshold for durability as well in order to bang with the big boys, those upper echelon guys in the top 10 and the top 5. Tony Yoka, he just looked like a guy who can't hack it.
I don't really know what he can change or what it is he needs to do.
That's a guy who's got to do some soul searching moving forward. Congratulations to Martin Bakole. We then come to the main event of the Golden Boy Promotions card that took place on the West Coast yesterday. The prediction stuck. I never thought for a second that Dominic Boesel was going to be a problem for Zurdo Ramirez. Dominic Boesel, who was stopped once before by a lesser, less physically imposing fighter than Zurdo Ramirez. Zurdo is right at home at light heavyweight. How this guy ever made the super middleweight limit is beyond me, because the guy's massive. Rumor has it that this guy rehydrated to something like 200 pounds.
Don't quote me on that, but that's what people are saying.
I've seen that sentiment expressed in some circles, small ones. Better still, Zurdo Ramirez next to Dominic Boesel, he don't look like the guy that moved up in weight not that long ago from super middleweight to light heavyweight. He made Dominic Boesel look like the smaller guy.
Zurdo Ramirez would make most light heavyweights look small if they were standing next to him.
Last night against Dominic Boesel, Zurdo Ramirez did what Zurdo Ramirez does. Jab his way in mid-range to inside and start letting off hooks. Hooks to the body, uppercuts that split the guard to the head. I will say that one of Zurdo's finer qualities is his punch selection once he's within range to get off those bent arm punches, those hooks, those uppercuts. He picks his punches fairly well once he's within striking distance. His sweet spot which is mid-range to inside. He can really break a guy down if a guy lets him get close enough to land those shots. And this is relevant ahead of a potential Dmitry Bivol fight, because Dmitry Bivol, he's not the kind of guy that's going to stand there with you in the pocket and trade punches, going blow for blow, toe-to-toe. That's not Dmitry's calling card, even if it's Zerdo's.
No, Dmitry Bivol's a characteristically moving target.
A mobile target, fast feet and fast hands, fighting on the fly. He'll have to with Zerdo Ramirez, because if he lets Zerdo crowd him, he could be in trouble. In Dimitri's last fight, he was the bigger guy. He was the more physically imposing fighter against the Canelo Alvarez, a naturally smaller fighter, moving up in weight in what was only his second professional fight as a light heavyweight. He won't have that advantage against Zerdo Ramirez. Zerdo's going to be the bigger guy in the ring the night of the fight.
And it'll be harder to put a dent in Zerdo than it was to put a dent in Canelo.
Don't misunderstand me. Zerdo Ramirez is in no way, shape, or form the same caliber of boxer as Canelo Alvarez, but what he is a naturally bigger guy.
Yeah.
Bigger than Canelo,
Yeah.
bigger than Zerdo.
Yeah.
So he's got durability and size on his side. He is the physically imposing fighter, or he would be in a Dmitry Bivol fight. The roles, as they were, they would be reversed for Dmitry. You ain't the big guy
A
now.
lot of guys at light heavyweight that look big next to Zerdo.
Dominic Boesel sure as hell didn't, as he was battered from round 1 to round 4. Zerdo Ramirez managed to close the show inside of 4 rounds.
Dominic didn't even make it to the midway point.
I told you, he wasn't not that long ago. He got stopped by Robin Krasnicki. If you're getting stopped by the likes of Robin Krasnicki, you don't go to distance with Zerdo Ramirez. A physically imposing pressure fighter that, while he's not the same caliber of boxer as a Canelo Alvarez or even a Dmitry Bivol, while he's not a cerebral fighter, he's got his own finer qualities, his own attributes that he brings to the table. Physical attributes that make him physically imposing, durable, and a hard man to discourage.
Got a pretty good engine, too.
As pressure fighters often do, it's a requisite of their base style that they be able to continuously apply that pressure from the opening round to the final round, if need be. That's the task that lays before Dmitry Bivol as this division's WBA champion. Zerdo Ramirez is now officially his mandatory challenger. Golden Boy Promotions is going to put the squeeze on the WBA for them to order that fight between them. What they want and what they aspire to is for Zerdo Ramirez to use Canelo Alvarez's latest loss at the hands of Dmitry Bivol as the launch pad for Zerdo Ramirez in the hearts and minds of those Chicano fight fans, those Mexican fight fans that saw Canelo falter. Maybe Zerdo can succeed where Canelo failed.
If he does, that's an instant profile boost.
Question now is, how long will it take for the WBA to order that fight? And it being that Zerdo Ramirez is the challenger and Dmitry Bivol is the champion, will Golden Boy Promotions give Matchroom any issues promoting that fight?
No, because in many ways, Dimitri's the A-side fighter.
He's the champion, and he's the guy who just gave the cash cow of boxing his second professional loss, Canelo Alvarez. By all rights, it should be a Matchroom show. Is Golden Boy Promotions going to cause any problems? Do they have any problems with that? We'll just have to wait and see. We then come to the fight that I think stole the show yesterday. Fight of the Year candidate, I think it's safe to say that. The rematch between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castaño for what was the undisputed junior middleweight championship of the world. A fight that delivered, if I do say so myself. I went with Jermell Charlo to box a better fight than he did the first time out, and I think he proved me right. It was Dan Canastota. Obi-Wan Kenobi of CompuBox said it best. Jermell Charlo threw 16 more punches per round than his career average. Landed 47% of his power shots. Jab rate was up. Commitment to the body. This version of Charlo will be very hard to beat. Ahead of this fight, I told you, the boxer-puncher, Jermell Charlo, is more capable of making adjustments ahead of a rematch than the pressure guy. The pressure fighter, which in this case is Brian Castaño. You know, Brian Castaño, he's a formidable fighter. And pressure fighters in general can be a handful, but not much about them changes fight by fight. Pressure guys are guys that tend to stay in character regardless of who's opposite the ring. And rematches,
You don't want to stay in character.
not when you've already fought the guy, because it makes you predictable. He now knows what to work around. He now knows what to expect. And in this situation, I've been saying it for weeks. I've been saying it for months. I've been saying it since the first fight. In a rematch situation, I favor Jermell Charlo to make the necessary adjustments to not only win the rematch decisively, but stop Brian Castaño. And that's exactly what he did.
What adjustments did he make, you
He
ask?
was busier. He was busier in this fight than he was in the first fight. He was busier in this fight than he is on average. He threw 14 more punches per round in this fight than he normally does. We already know that Jermell Charlo packs a big enough punch that he can actually hurt Brian Castaño. We saw that in the last fight. We saw that in the first one.
One of the adjustments I expected him to make is let his hands go more.
You gotta let your hands go, because so long as you're letting your hands go, the probability of you breaking this guy down is that much greater for it. Your power means nothing if you don't land, and you don't land if you don't throw.
Jermell let his hands go in this fight the way I expected him to.
And his feet were definitely in this thing. You know, a lot of people, they don't pay attention to a guy's feet and what he's doing, what he's setting up. A lot of the exchanges in this fight, unlike in the first one, a lot of the exchanges in this fight happened on Jermell Charlo's terms because he was dictating the space of the fight. Yeah, he was giving up ground in this fight the way he was the first time out, but because he was letting his hands go, because he was initiating the action, sticking that jab out there and quickly bringing over that backhand, most of the exchanges you saw and most of the action, it was actually happening on Jermell Charlo's terms as opposed to Brian's. There's a thin line between laying off to stay out of an exchange and laying off to set a trap.
There's a thin line between giving up ground to the guy and setting the guy up.
If you insist on scoring these fights live, you do wise to know the difference. Glaring difference in this fight from the first one.
In the first fight, it was Brian Castaño forcing a lot of those exchanges.
Whereas in the second one, because Jermell Charlo was letting his hands go more so than he did the first time out, the exchanges were happening on his terms, not Brian's. And this time, he was able to really put a dent in that guy and break him down. Sneaky hooks to the body.
Jab right hands that penetrated the guard.
And even in the pocket, where Brian Castaño normally has the upper hand, where Brian Castaño tends to dominate things. Even in the pocket, Jermell Charlo got off some eye-catching punches, some eye-catching hooks.
I only had Brian winning 2, maybe 3 rounds.
2 or 3 of the 10 before he was stopped by Jermell Charlo after having been dropped 2 times. If I'm being honest, the ref could have waved this thing off after the first knockdown because Brian's equilibrium was clearly off.
So maybe it's a blessing in disguise that he didn't.
There's no wide outcry of an early stoppage or any controversy. He let Brian get back out there one more time before Jermell Charlo finished him. Finished him off, closed strong.
Finished strong.
Finished Brian Castaño off a hard straight left hand followed by a left hook to Brian's midsection that sent him to the canvas for the second time. A thoroughly entertaining fight, and as stated,
I've always viewed Jermell as the more ambitious Charlo of the Charlo brothers.
Most of the time, the talk centered around the Charlo brothers seems to be centered around Jermell, though I don't know why, when it's Jermell getting the goddamn job done and doing it in style. Every single title he's won so far, he's won by way of knockout.
He knocked out Tony Harrison in the rematch.
Knocked out Jason Rosario and took his 2 alphabet titles, and in this sequel, this rematch with Brian Castaño, he stopped him.
It did take some doing.
Situational awareness. Jermell Charlo was very much switched on for this sequel, actually getting under and around some looping shots from Brian Castaño, looping right hands, coming over with counter hooks, counter shots.
Controlling the distance at which the fight was being fought and simultaneously being busier than the other guy.
Being the busier fighter, that's the difference. By this time, you know that Brian Castaño is going to come forward. You know what he wants to do. He's predictable now.
Don't let him outwork you this time.
Jermell Charlo didn't. He is now the junior middleweight division's undisputed champion. The first undisputed junior middleweight champion of the 4-belt era. Congratulations to him.